Ja, nästa person är då hedersdoktor Cheryl Akner Koler. Och Cheryl, hon är professor vid Konstfack i Stockholm. Och hon är en pionjär inom konstnärlig forskning. Hennes metodik och analyssätt ger en helt ny plattform av förståelse för formutveckling inom designområdet. Och är även väl förankrat vid Mittuniversitetet. Och där vi då har en masterutbildning som heter Design for All. Dagens titel, Form and Formlessness, är faktiskt detsamma som hennes titel på hennes doktorsavhandling. Och jag lämnar nu över till dig, Cheryl. Varsågod.
Thank you. So, first I'd like to... Can you hear me? Is it okay? Yeah. First I'd like to thank Mittuniversity and especially the design program for offering this amazing position. So I really appreciate that. And I'm especially thankful to the teachers that have worked with my work and given like some foundational courses in form in order for them to then be more articulate when they work with inclusive design. So one of my former students sort of arranged that. So I'm really happy with that. And then I'd like to also say that most of the work that has been written about this is presented in my thesis in the first part, and it's a taxonomy of form with very sort of strict categories. And then every single principle is given in an abstract understanding and then in a physical work. So everything that's in that book has a physical correlation to something you can do with your hands and physically. And that's an important part of aesthetic theories and aesthetic research. The major ideas that I have come from Pratt Institute. So Rowena Reed and Alexander Costello, who were my mentors, they started in 1934 the first industrial design program. So this has really strong roots to the visual thinking and the spatial understanding that comes from Rowena and Alexander. And that's quite a unique aspect. And they were leading in the field for about 50 years. And they still are. So there's something about thinking in terms of abstraction, which I would like to now, I guess. Is it this or? Oh, next, I see, got it. Okay, so the idea of abstraction is a really important part of what academy is about. And without, of course, being in a teaching position, without having students that can theoretically follow your presentations, you wouldn't really be able to work in abstractions. And this model that I have here, it came at the very end of my thesis. And it's called the 3 modes of abstraction. And then you have, the first is numeric. And it's totally coded. It also can separate itself, so you don't have to know if it's apples or pears. So it can be separated from the context in which it's in. And there's enormous signs and symbols of how to work with math and numeric thinking. And then you have linguistic, which are words, and they're extremely coded. You have to live in France. You have to be around French people to understand French. But it's totally contextual. But it's not easily shared between disciplines or between cultures. So it's extremely contextual languages. They can, of course, be shared through the abstractions of words, but still there's so much to do with understanding it through the culture itself. And then the last one is aesthetic abstractions, and that's what I work strongly with. And that would really mean anything that we create. So this is an abstraction. Drawing is an abstraction. So how do we go from thinking of something and then creating something that's out there? And those lines, planes, volumes, forms, they communicate to us. So these abstractions are important. So now I just need to, there I am. So in my first book, which was published 1994. It's one of the first out there that really helps teachers, because a lot of times in the field of aesthetics it's owned by philosophy, and it's not until I was one of the first PhD students that was funded by the Swedish Research Council in 2002. So it's not been until really the beginning of this century that you were able to, as a practitioner, do research. So these are the structures that came from Rowena and Alexander in New York, and then I put them into these categories. So I have elements and force and properties, movements and forces, relationships and organizations. So these are the 4 categories, and then within each one of them, then I'm particular about working with both physical forms of an element, but also the spatial, enclosed spaces, mellanrumsform in Swedish. So all of those contexts that concepts that I have in each one of those categories can be moved between physical forms and space. And a lot of it has to do with a kind of a visual thinking. And it's a visual think that you look inside the form. So if you're a sculptor, when you're sculpting a body, you look inside the form to find out where the balances are, and then you come to the outside the contours. So this whole idea is really starting from a sculptural point of view. And then the thing on the side, it says here, intention of the Gestalt. So none of these principles are going to help you if you don't know what you want to do. So you have to have the intention of the Gestalt, and that's driven by the compassion you have for what it is you want to say. So it's emotionally driven, even though it's contextually involved in all sorts of physical situations that are very objective in a sense, but it has a certain amount of emotions in order to deal with complexity. So that method is what's being taught at the school. I'm not having an easy time with this. Now I just want to show you 2 projects that just recently got finished. And this is done by Adam Mattsson and Martin Åhlén. And they're from the University of Luleå in the human technology program. And what they're doing is trying to transpose music into vibration so that a person that is deaf can feel the whole composition, not just the vibes from the bass. So it's a research that I've been working together with 3 or 4 other people in audiology and in technology that has to do with kind of high tech in a way. But their idea was, okay, how should we place this on the body? And we've done a lot of studies about how vibration is felt on different parts of the body, but they placed it here and in the back, and you could feel the vibration through the heart, the lungs. So that's how they had it. And then the form itself is based on, if you take a metal sheet and a viola strings, and you just put sand on something, and then you get a certain hertz, 125, 100, 200. You get these amazing patterns. So that particular pattern, which is a soft triangle, is the pattern you get at 125 hertz. So it's the frequency of the most sensitive part of the skin. So that's how I try to get students to really understand that when they're in form, they must be able to find some connections with the problem itself, with the Gestalt situation, in order to drive their process. And here's another riding helmet. So this is Axel Abrahamsson. So he's from a family that rides horses, and he's quite amazed at the fact that there's such fashion and tradition about the safety, things like a helmet and even the padding. So he decided that he would try to heighten the security and safety of this helmet and still maintain like the classic, iconic sort of feeling of that. And so this form is then now better than a cross motorcycle bike helmet. The way it's constructed, the way it sits on your head, and the way it also changes when you do fall. So if you see the bottom down here, when you have a visor, it sticks out. That's the last thing you want on a helmet. You want to make sure there's nothing in the way. But since it was supposed to be there for the icon, then it falls off and goes in the opposite direction. And then it's really a better solution than the helmets we have today. So the piece falls off. So in some ways, by questioning the norm, realizing the norm's too strong, if I still want to be within the market area, then this would be a good way to develop it. And then it also heightened the security and the quality of the helmet. So that's kind of how we do it. But I don't go into the forms right now, but you can see the enclosed space, melon rooms form, that has as much design as the helmet itself. So looking inside the helmet, looking around the helmet, how it activates space, that's a really important part of how we work. I'm a Mac person. That's probably why. Okay, now in this area of aesthetics, I really found out that I was in aesthetics. I thought I was in formlära. When I came to Chalmers to do my PhD, the department I came to was called formlära in Swedish, and in English it's called theoretical and applied aesthetics. So then I realized I was in the whole field of aesthetics if I was going to have a PhD from there. And so after my thesis, I realized, or during my thesis, I found this definition from 1735, which says the science of sensuous cognition. So Baumgartner tried to get the sciences to accept aesthetics so long, and we still don't accept them today. It's 20 years. So I created this model called the fusion of the senses model. And the more important thing is I put haptics at the top. So haptics, which includes the sense of touch, tactility, but also the gripping, the whole idea of just doing things is about the haptics. So it's the muscle movement, it's the kinesthetics, it's everything about movement. So that haptics is at the top, and then I go around to audio, smell, taste, and vision, and movement's in the center because all the senses need movement. Let's see. And from there, then I put that model. This is maybe a little messy, but I've been reading a lot about cognition right now, and cognition is they're finally giving us enough evidence that there's no such thing as what Kant thought was a little place in the head, which is reserved for the brain of reason. There's no such thing. The whole cortex is full of being wired to the body, and that we think through the body. And so this is putting the fusion of the senses model in the center, and then the idea that cognition is happening as we're in the active process, and that there's a separation between right now the distance senses. You can't see that so well, but visual and audio are the distance senses, and those are the senses we spent a lot of time on. And philosophy also spends a lot of time on them, and they totally ignore the proximity senses. So haptics, smell and taste, movement. Philosophy doesn't want to go there because they're people that really do sit and think. And if you're in the art world, the design world, then we don't sit and think. We work and do and think. So this is a really important model, and hopefully it will catch on even more. So from this, since I'm a sculptor, then there's so much evidence about the importance of the hand, the thumb, the ability to grasp tools. And this quote is wonderful. So human development and intelligence are intimately related with our highly sophisticated haptic and tactile senses and the fine motor sense developed primarily in the hands. So without these hands, we wouldn't have the brain. So I always say, without these hands, you will be retarded. So use your hands. So I have 2 more minutes, so I'll go through these kind of quick. So this is a model that has to do with haptics, and it's the haptics of the hand. So it's airflow, temperature, vibration, things that are more in the space, in the studio space. And the next is texture, substance, weight. So now I'm going more to the materials. And the next is proportion, balance, contour. And then the whole thing ends in the making process. So this is just a way to sensitize yourself, get you aware of the qualities of what three-dimensional world's all about. And it also sensitizes you in order to start your emotional experience with the Gestalt process. So this model is very central, and it was inspired by Klatsky and Lederman's model. And if you see the basic graphic features of this model, is first you have circular, and then you have the 9 attributes in the circle. And then you have particular icons that are drawn. And then you have the idea that you go into the concept of make. So as I position these in a subjectively grounded awareness of these attributes, those are the ones that I chose to put in this configuration. And then I'll just briefly show you this model. This model is about the cerebral cortex, and it shows you the distortion of the body if it was in relationship to the wiring to the cortex. And you can see in the sensory experience when you're just sort of passively being poked, then we're still really wired, but if you're actively in the motor process, then the brain is extremely activated. And then if you see this one, the mouth and the nose also are. So this is my next area that I work with Misha Billing, who's in Mästerkockstävling. And so she and I have worked a lot with what's the correlation between the hand and the mouth and the nose. And so she's used 9 attributes in which you can see moisture is here, and she took away vibration. And also air flows at the end. That's where the retronasal is. So it's like we try to keep to these kind of rules of configuration, and you reconfigure through a transpositional operation, we call it. And there's enough theory around transpositional operations where you retain the certain quality of the figure itself, but you change it based on the need of the person that's creating the model. So each one of these models is based on a first-person experience in a particular context. And then they have the right to put them wherever they want and change the icons if they care. So now we have 36 icons, 36 definitions, 14 common. There's a lot there. So let's see. I got 1 more minute. Okay. So how did all these things happen? They happen through something called an aesthetic elaboration. So we do these kind of really experiential situations. You plan them for like 6 months. You decide who's the leader, what's the theme, what type of sort of materials and phenomena are you going to use? Do you need an expert? Then you have a wonderful group of people that help you play with it. And then you create like a setup, and then you invite these people in. And these people that you invite in are people that you really want to get feedback from. So these particular A labs are what gave us the opportunity to then, for example, drink combinations of food systems and sculpt at the same time and write at the same time. So that all of these situations that we set up in these A labs are where we got the experiences. And then by sharing that, then it's clear how we then managed to go together. So I think I can end there.
Thank you very much. So do we have any questions or comments?
I had 10 more, I think.
Thank you very much for this really mind-provoking presentation. It gives me a lot to think. And however, I do wonder whether the digital and the virtual world is not changing this. I relate to this slide where you showed the big hand and the small brain. And if I think of my grandchildren, for example, they grow up now with the smartphones and the tablets. Or myself, I always wanted to be an artist. I always wanted to do watercolors. I always failed. But now I have Photoshop. And I do watercolors with Photoshop and some apps and what have you. So is it not that there is a shortcut between my hands and my brain? I mean, what is happening here? I'm skipping a process. I'm skipping my hands, and I realize this. Yeah. I realize this very much. However, the result...
Well, At least you're indulging in your eyes. And then you're working with composition. That's good. You don't get some same feedback, and you don't get the emotional experience of this composition in relation to that. You can't make it as good as decisions because you're not in the immediate situation. So why don't you just put things physically over here, just to remind yourself it's water. When I push down hard, this happens. When I pull over here, that happens. And then you can go back to the skill. And you will probably be much better at doing it in the real world, because you did understand like how forces are and how water spreads, because these programs are really quite good. But I really definitely forget all of my students to always go out in the physical world, find out what the proportions are, see how it balances, so that they don't get stuck in that world, because that's when they also start thinking, yeah, that doesn't work, or, oh, if I put it this way, it becomes, you know, there's all sorts of things that you don't get in the computer because it doesn't have the gravitation and it doesn't have the closeness to you. Even though your eyes are closed, it's retinal.
I have a question. I was kind of fascinated by these experiments when you had the music going from to the tactile experience and so on.
Yeah?
You know, are there composition made for tactile music in that sense? How is it? You know, the art form in itself, in some way, it seems very interesting. In some.
That's the thing. Audio, if you can be distant from it, you can be somewhere totally out. So both visual and audio are distant senses, but they're also in the physical world. So we really want the fusion of all the senses. And a musician is extremely haptic. So I work right now with a violist, and we're trying to figure out vibration. So it's so wonderful to have her just pick up her instrument and find out where, you know, the first string is 135 hertz or something. So she knows the mathematics of her instrument, and then we can hear it at the same time. And then when she goes to the dissonance, we're trying to find pleasurable dissonance. So when she disses, it's like, oh, that was an interesting dissonance. That's not, and you know, and everyone realizes that was really bad. And that's an emotional experience that seemed to be shared, at least by that little group. So absolute music is totally the musician itself, but the audio information oftentimes is considered, it goes through the ear. It really does go through all of your, if you're in the physical room with the instruments. So you're using haptics to both hear and to then work, to play.
Here, at the back. Thank you for your excellent presentation. I am very much interested about the design you show about your helmet, because we do a lot of research and intervention on helmet use for the motorcycle riders. And it's a major challenge. In every global meeting of World Health Organization and UN meetings, everyone cries about helmet use. So I got a very interesting point from your helmet design, because that could be attractive, especially in the low and middle income countries. Yes.
There's a shift inside. So when you put the helmet out here, it doesn't fall off, but there's a double movement there. So if it's moving that way, then your head goes in the opposite position, so it's better. But this one falls off completely. So and one thing I forgot to say is horseback riding is the second most dangerous sport there is, next to cross-country motorcycle driving. And the cross-country motorcycle people have huge security. Everything about everything they have is so thought through. But the people that put their kids on horses have no idea. They're sort of in this little normative bubble that as long as you look nice, it's fine. So you should go over to that area. And if you want to get to a good, it's called POC, P-O-C, piece of cake in a way, POC. They do really great helmets, and they do a lot of research. So if you would like to go see them, you should.
Thank you. I will contact you later. Thank you.
Thank you very much once more. So we from Mittuniversitetets University would like to hand you this small gift, and congratulations once more.
Thank you. Really. Thank you.
Så nu tar vi